How's it going, everybody? I'm going to say, how's it going, guys? And then I thought, wait, there's going to be, hopefully we're going to get some women listeners here. So I would say, how's it going, guys and gals here? We've got an awesome podcast today. I'm going to bring on Kelly McCahey. She is a friend that I have gotten to know over the last couple of years, although we haven't actually met in person. It is fun to talk to Kelly. I've done a podcast with her before. She is the founder of Over and Out Moto. It's basically a women's only event that happens on the Eastern Seaboard here in the United States, where they get together and they learn how to ride and they network with one another and they do drills and they do trainings and they just have an awesome time. And it's a fantastic resource for, I know, the women riders out there on the East Coast. I wish we could get something like this here on the West Coast for some of the demand out here. But because Kelly has a unique audience where she's got a lot of women followers, it puts her in a unique position, a unique perspective as she's learning and growing in this sport to be able to help women to know what to do about bikes and what to do about riding and some different things that are challenges that are maybe unique to the ladies. So today we're going to bring Kelly on and we're going to talk about, she's basically gathered a bunch of questions from her followers and we're going to go through and do an interview and try to answer some of these questions. So let's get Kelly on the phone.
This is Kelly.
How you doing, Kelly?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Is your morning going okay?
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool.
Pretty easy morning here, just in quarantine.
Well, if you're still okay to go, I've got my recording equipment going and we can just get started.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump in.
So tell me, Kelly, what have you been up to since the last time we talked? I think we had our last podcast back in, what was that, like September time? Was sometime back then in 2019?
Yeah, because it was like the week before I had that other event that was it was like a motocross focused event. That was the first week of October. So it had to be like right before that.
Yeah. So how did that event end up turning out? Tell us a little bit about it.
It was really great. Just a refresher. It was, so I host an event in the summer that's more like enduro trail riding. And then there's open kind of grass area too. So it's for all levels. And then we have lessons, we have marked trails, games, stuff like that. This other event that I had was more, it's a private property. It's a farm and it's someone I know who has a professionally built motocross track. They actually have the guys from Dirtworks come in because they're friends with them. So the guys who build the Dirtworks build the Supercross tracks for cool. Supercross Live across the country. So these are guys who, they know what they're doing. They know how to use the equipment. They know how to, make a jump longer, shorter, a good takeoff, all that stuff. So they actually came in and put the finishing touches back on this track that they built. And the track was built to be friendly for all levels. So what's great is, the person who owns it, he actually has kids and he would let his kids ride on it. It's all pretty mellow, like tabletops. But if you are someone who actively rides motocross, you can still hit these and clear them, and it's fun, So there's nothing too gnarly or too jarring about it. It's a really fun track. So we ended up having maybe 150 ladies show up, and a lot of them had never been on a track before. And so that was the cool thing is I just wanted them to see what it was like to have the repetition to practice certain things. So we even had, say, like some girls who actively ride the woods, but if you're not always hitting the same woods trail in the same 10-minute span, you're not getting any repetition. So it's just good to have different jumps, different turns, and really kind of dial in the skills. And we had some lesson groups as well. So we had for the more intro girls, there's a school out here, GPMX. It's Greg Paymart. He's a motocross pro. He and his wife do a school just for girls. So they came out and they did the intro. And those girls pretty much, they spent their time out in the field learning basic techniques, turns, and then they had a guided introductory lap around the track and got to kind of learn how to do that. And then for more advanced riders, we had Aaron Lampy, who's a pro motocross rider from the East Coast here. And he has a school in New York called Lampy MX Training. Young guy, in his mid-20s, but he's great. He's got a very reputable school. He was so friendly and encouraging and nice. And like, he came out, and to have, mostly a bunch of trail riding girls get on the track for their first time and really learn how to position their bodies and how to hit the face of a jump. It was cool. It was cool to watch them all progress so quickly in a day or two because they had that.
That is so cool. If you guys haven't checked this out, you should go check out Kelly's website. It's overandoutmoto.com. I'm looking at it right now. She's got some material on there from the prior events, and then she's also got information on the upcoming event. If you guys out there are listening, this is something that you might want to get your wives involved with. And if you're one of the very few women listeners, hopefully, I was saying, hopefully we get a lot more women listeners on this podcast, because we're gonna try to get all of Kelly's people to come over here and listen to this. But your upcoming event, because of COVID and everything, you've had to kind of push that back to later in the year. So now, aren't you looking for about October 2nd through the 4th of 2020 here to have the next event?
Yeah, and that's the one that doesn't have the motocross track. That's the one we take over, like a 2,300 acre parcel of property in Pennsylvania that has wooded trails. It has some pretty technical stuff on it, but it also has a lot of wide open meadows and like little, I almost call it's almost like a skate park. Like, it just has lots of little features you can hit. It has some hill climbs. It's pretty rocky terrain, which I personally really like. And then there's just beautiful open fields too that grow wildflowers. I mean, it's a really beautiful little piece of property,
Awesome.
and it has a little bit of everything. So that'll be great actually in fall too, when the leaves change. It's gonna be a good time.
Yeah. You're kind of rolling with the punches here with trying to make lemonade out of lemons with what we've been dealt with COVID. So I think that's super cool. I've seen a couple of your emails come through, just kind of letting people know about the plans, because you were going to have it earlier in the year, like earlier in the summer, and then it's like, we better push this back, and hopefully we get through the worst of the COVID stuff. So good job with that.
Yeah, we usually do that the last weekend of June, but there's just no way, there's no information, and it's not anybody's fault. I just mean there's no way that anybody can really know. There's no good answer, basically. So we're all kind of dealing with this, for a lot of different businesses and events. Like, there kind of is no good answer, but all we can do is maybe postpone, and hopefully we'll see some clarity in the coming months and know what we're dealing with as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome. I'm just looking at the event schedule that you have up here. It's fantastic. I think I was saying before I brought you on, just a quick little intro. This would be cool if we had something like this in the West. I know that you're in New Jersey. Is that where it's at? Well, yeah, actually, it's
I'm
in
New Jersey. Yeah.
The event's going to be in Pennsylvania, but you're in New Jersey. I was wishing that we had something like this out here in the West, and maybe we do, and I just don't know about it. It's entirely possible that there are groups that are doing this in California, and I just am not aware of it. But you're doing a good job with the promotion of that, and it's an awesome thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, and there are a couple others. There's Babes in the Dirt in California. They do a women's camp out each year. And
I was just gonna Google that right now, and then I decided not to, because I don't know if I want to Google Babes in the Dirt. I'll have to have the I'll have to have the exact URL before I start looking that up.
So. Oh yeah, well that is the URL.
Babesinthedirt.com.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I actually know the girls that run that, and they also run Babes Right Out, which is a motorcycle event. So they did some on the West Coast, and they came and did one on the East Coast. And that was actually one of my first exposures to seeing their street riding event. And pretty much the very first year I met them, that was the first year they came east, and I was riding dirt already. And as I met girls at that street riding event, I showed up on my TTR 250. So, for a lot of girls newly getting into street riding, a lot of them are getting like cruisers, Harleys, stuff like that. And I definitely stood out maybe a little bit, or I felt like I would. But there were other girls there with dual sports, but it's a very different looking thing when you're not the kind of girl who rides a dual sport. You're like, well, what is that? So even back then, I remember that first time I went to that gathering, I made friends with a lot of just different girls who came up and asked me what the deal was with my bike. And, and I said, well, and amazingly, that was my first outing by myself on the bike, like riding to a camp out and spending 2 nights. And I was just with my girlfriend who, she rode a Harley at the time. And we just went, she and I, and it was the first time taking my dual sport, that far and say loading things up on it, like putting a tent and everything that I was going to wear for 2 days on it. That was my first experience doing that. And it was really awesome. I mean, I came home and I was like, this bike was made for this, because even through the campgrounds, there's roots and trees and rocks, and it's just easy in, easy out. And then even just kind of cruising around this was upstate New York, a lot of the roads up there, it was great on a dual sport. So it was interesting. And then after that first event, I was talking to the event runners, and I said, well, I'd like to do a dirt event out here. If you're interested in doing it with me, let me know. And it was funny, even then I pitched the place that I hold my motocross event. I said, I have a friend who has this property and I want to do something there and invite ladies. And, there's just so much going on that I think another good year went by and they weren't able to do it with me, but they said, we'll support you. So they're on my flyer as one of my listed sponsors, because, from the get-go, they were like, well, it's not something we can take on, but we'll support you. We'll introduce you to our sponsors and, whatever. So whatever they're willing, they're always willing to help me, in any way. So we kind of share that camaraderie. Like I'll share, I'll shout out some of their posts. They'll shout out some of mine. So we just have the same ideals at heart, I guess you could
Cool.
say.
Very good, very good. Well, one of the reasons why we wanted to kind of do this follow-up podcast is because you reached out to me and said, I was listening to the original interview we did, and you kind of said, I wish I would have, explained things a little bit differently. And I think it was fine. I think that's the perfect lead in for this. So kind of the idea for today was to kind of go through, get some of the questions from your followers, from the female contingency, and answer some of the questions that they have about getting into bikes and progressing in bikes. And so you've gathered a whole bunch of different questions here that we can go over. And I think that's fantastic. I've used you as a resource a little bit here over the last year and a half or so. I haven't used you nearly as much as I should, but I'll get emails in usually from men. Occasionally there's some women that come in and it's the men are saying, hey, I'm trying to find, the right gear for my wife or the right bike for my wife. Do you have any ideas? And if I'm thinking correctly in that moment, which usually I'm not, I'll try to CC you or get them in touch with you if I'm, and so you've been kind of a good resource with that. And I feel like you're in a unique position, a little bit better position than me to give, advice to women. About what types of gear they should be getting and what types of bikes that they should be looking for. And so I think it'll be fun to kind of go through, because there's even if you're not a woman listening to this show, you probably have, a wife or a girlfriend, and maybe they want to get into this, or maybe your friend has, a wife or a girlfriend that wants to get into this. And I think it'll offer some pretty cool insight.
Yeah, I'm excited for this. And like you said, I had said to you, I felt like when I was on your podcast last, the way I answered questions was I answered questions in ways that I knew that you would understand. And I didn't want to bore your listeners by, if they were experienced riders, I sort of skipped over like what makes a good intro bike. And I kind of just like blasted right through that answer, and I didn't really elaborate. Listening back, I realized, I didn't elaborate in the way that I expected the females to actually be listening to me. And so that's kind of what I was, hoping to do a little bit more too in being able to answer these. And also, and it's funny, I joke that, I'm not really an expert, but I do have the experiences that I have. And so there's that joke of like, when you're telling kids that, they have to go to school and you say, what can you do with a third grade education? Oh, well, you can teach second graders.
Yeah.
That joke? Yeah. So I'm like, I may not be an expert, but I know enough of what I experienced as a newer and intermediate rider that I can at least kind of empathize and figure out what it is the person is actually trying to ask for. Sometimes there isn't even an answer. Sometimes the only answer is experience will teach you something, but there's always information that I think women are looking for just to make themselves feel more confident. Information just has a way of doing that. And if it definitely just comes back down to, you're going to have to go and try it for yourself, then yeah, but sometimes talking about it helps too.
Yeah, no, I can totally relate to that. I've actually now, because I hear that all the time, like, Kyle, who are you to be offering advice? You're not a professional racer. You're not a professional rider. And, it's a valid question. And now at this point, this month, I've actually been riding dirt bikes for 10 years. So my answer back now to them is I'm offering advice to the people who have been riding less than me, which is a decade. So if you've been riding longer than me and you don't think I have anything to offer, then that's totally cool and you can turn off. If you've been riding for less than a year, which there are thousands of you out there, or less than 10 years, then you might be able to learn something from this. And even so, it's just the passion. So I love the fact that you're just like, look, I am okay giving this advice. This is advice coming from me, and I think that is perfect. That's basically been my entire platform. Is it's like, hey, look, I'm not the pro rider out there, but I know what I know, and I've had my experiences, and it might be helpful to you. And so I love that approach. So
yeah, and I think it's the way the discussion is held too, and the reason that I value from the get go, I kind of reached out to you for some bike advice, and what was helpful is you had the conversation with me. You were willing to listen to the questions I had and empathize with what it was I was trying to put my finger on, and that's what's really helpful. I mean, and in my experience of riding over the past 8 years, I've had people who I've pitched a question to, whether they're mechanics or fellow riders or whatever, who just didn't really give me anything back. And then there are just certain people who have. There's one mechanic who we know who I brought my bike to, and what was just so great is I was quick to kind of like shove aside my own assessment of what was going on with the bike. And I kind of kept saying, well, look, I'm not an expert or whatever. And he said to me, you're the one riding it. You know what you feel. Like, trust how you feel.
Yeah.
And that made me feel so much better, because then what he was able to look at and find and fix, turned out there were things that could have been done. And that's very validating. So, also just had my suspension redone by Drew Smith at Works Enduro. He's pretty widely known in the world. The best thing about Drew is he said, trust yourself. He wasn't there to give me all of the answers. He was there to tell me that I know how my bike feels, and, he's there to do the expert work, but I'm still the being that's riding the bike. So I like that about our conversations, is there's room for, you don't have to be the expert, but if we're exploring enough, that I think that gives a lot of women kind of need that or want that.
Yeah. No, totally. So let's jump right in. We've got a bunch of questions. We've definitely got some that we want to hit, and then if we have time, we've got some other ones that we can circle back through. So the first question came from Alexa. We'll just use first names here. So Alexa asks, what is a great affordable starter bike? I want to buy used, but I don't know where to start. So what advice do you have for Alexa with that one?
I would say, so the known affordable starter bikes are pretty much the Japanese smaller 4-stroke bikes. And so that would be, Honda has a CRF 150, or sorry, not 150, that's a 125 right now. Yamaha makes a TTR 125, and Kawasaki has a KLX 140. And I'm speaking particularly about trail bikes. So each of these makers, they make trail bikes and then they make race bikes. So the difference being, on a trail, you're a little more closed in. You might be going a little bit slower compared to a wide open track. And the race bikes, you might be on a track where it's pretty wide open. You're maybe going a little faster because there's no trees in your way, that kind of thing. And the difference in those bikes is also that, on a racetrack, you're going to have more suspension, which is a stiffer suspension, which makes the bike a little taller. Those bikes typically run a little louder. And if you then take those bikes into the woods where you're kind of riding more technical and slow, they can overheat. And they're also a bit more, they have more pull when you're going, from throttle to clutch. They've got, more oomph, is my maybe beginner way of putting it. So depending on what you're looking at, Yamaha, Honda, Kawasaki, they're all going to have a race model bike, which is like a motocross bike, or like a trail bike. and the trail bikes are the ones that I just mentioned. And they're all pretty great. And I would say beyond that, it can come down to personal preference. So for these girls, if they have a chance to go to a shop, go to a dealer, and sit on each one and see which one feels about right from the size and everything. Sit on it, but also stand up if you can and lean it side to side against like the inside of your legs. Feel how the weight is balanced. Some of them are a little more top heavy than others. Think about standing next to it and like dipping it down low and picking it up again. Make sure, you kind of see how that feels. And then some of these models, they also make in small wheel versus big wheel. So like that 125 that Honda makes, they make a small wheel and a big wheel, just meaning that the tires, the wheels are a couple different sizes. They're still not as big as a full-size bike, most of them, but it's a great place to start. And then and I think all of them are really kind of priced somewhere in the 3,000-4,000 range. So if you're looking to say go used and find one of those, you can, you can look on Craigslist. You could look in some various places. Maybe there's a bike shop near you that is selling some pre-owned motorcycles. So that's kind of different. And that can also just open up maybe a little bit of question as to how good of a shape the bike is in. So, when it comes down to that, you'll want to ask the year of the bike and see really how clean it is. If it's someone who kept their bikes clean all those years, it's probably going to run pretty well. We could definitely get into a whole list of stuff to look at for a used bike, but I know that's not exactly the question here. So I'm gonna stop there and just say like that first recommendation of affordable starter bikes is the Honda, Yamaha 125. Sometimes 150s if they have a 150 model. And then I know Kawasaki has that 140 that they make in a few different tire sizes.
Yeah, and I love that. The first one that you mentioned is that Honda CRF 125F. I actually own that bike. I bought it for my 14-year-old daughter. She was 13 when I bought it, and she can still ride that thing. She doesn't ride it a ton, but it's also perfect for my wife, who's about 5'6". She doesn't ride very often, but every once in a while when we're camping, she'll throw a leg over it and go. And I've been riding that bike with my 3-year-old daughter around the neighborhood. That is and I've got the 2019 125F. I'm 99% sure I have the big wheel version. It's been my favorite kid bike that I have personally purchased so far for my kids. I need to do a full review on that, but that's been a fantastic little bike. And of all the bikes that I've bought that weren't specifically for me, that is the bike that I enjoyed the most. And so I wholeheartedly agree that would be a great starter bike for many people, but especially if your inseam isn't quite as tall. So fantastic bike. And in 2019, that became fuel injected. So that's an awesome one.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And it's funny that you say that because you actually forwarded me 2 days ago a question from a male, a male who was trying to help his friend find the bike, and that was the same answer that I gave back to him. And he was saying even in his world that he has loved riding those too. And I'm glad that you said that too, because one of the things I said to him was I still have my 150F, which they're not making anymore. I think they replaced that with having the 125 big wheel. But the 150F is what I rode for quite a few years. That's really like what helped me become a good rider. And we keep it. And my husband loves riding it. So while his KTM was in the shop recently, we did a woods ride and he took the 150F. And it's just a different bike. It's lower to the ground. It's a little more, it doesn't have the support and suspension of a big bike, but it's so fun that he loved it. He was like, I don't care. I'll ride that 150. So it's a bike that we'll keep forever, that he'll still ride and have fun with as an adult male. And I actually got one because one of our adult male friends bought one. He bought one for himself that his sons could also grow into and use, but he still has it for himself as well. And he's like 6'5".
Yeah, and they're not.
Tall guy.
It's a lower compression motor, so it'll last forever, and it's probably one that I'll hang on to. And the reason why is just because it'll be something that I can tool around camp or around my neighborhood, and it's super quiet. The thing is whisper quiet, so that's going to be good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's move on to Shannon's question. Shannon says, I'm looking to upgrade my bike as an intermediate, smaller female rider. I'm having a really hard time finding a non-kid size bike that has good power band, isn't too heavy or too tall that I can advance into. I like trail riding more than motocross, and all the bikes I've researched are either geared towards the beginner or the expert. I don't plan on doing anything crazy, but I don't want to buy another bike only to outgrow it again in a year. Any suggestions? I'm really interested in the Yamaha WR250F, but worried it'll be too much bike for me. Shannon, that's an awesome question. So what do you have to say to Shannon?
I actually know Shannon. We actually went to high school together, so I know exactly who this is. And so I know like her size and everything, and I've seen her ride. And it's funny, like every question that she has, I want to answer with what I'm riding, which is the Beta 200RR.
I love it. That's right where I would go for her.
Yeah, and I know that you've ridden that too, so I know you've said it. A lot of different reviewers have said it. It is a bike that is a mellow enough bike that we'll use the word intermediate. I mean, that's a tricky word because intermediate is such a broad term, but that an intermediate rider can move up to. But it also has. It's like for every rider. I feel like you've summed it up very well with. If this is the first bike, like bigger bike that you're moving up to, it's great. If you're a seasoned rider for decades and you really want like a good bike for technical trails, that it's an awesome bike. It's kind of an all around. And for me, I ended up looking at that bike because of the luggability of the engine and the height and the weight. So compared to some of the other options that were out there, which I was looking at the time at the Husqvarna or KTM 150s, 152 strokes. Some of the concerns were I wanted lighter weight. I wanted to be able to, say, dab or touch a foot down when I needed to. If it's muddy or for, in something technical, I didn't want to be high-siding, falling over too much. So what I found when the Beta came out is the natural seat height of them is a little bit lower. And then I was able to swap out the springs, which, set the sag properly for me, for my weight, and then purchased a seat concept seat that took another inch off of the height. And so right now that's what I'm riding. I didn't lower anything about the inner suspension. I just swapped the springs out and got that other seat, and that bike is awesome. And again, I'm like 5'6".
Oh, perfect. So you hit it. So you're the same height as my wife. And the other thing about that Beta 200, and I cannot say enough good about it, I did a full review on that bike. I only had one thing that I didn't like about the bike, and it was a nitpicking thing that most riders will never experience, which was the turning radius. It doesn't turn super tight, but if you're not riding in the West on the super nasty, gnarly terrain, you would never even notice that. It would never be a thing. But the other thing about that bike is it can do everything. It's literally my favorite starter bike. But like you said, it's a starter bike, it's an intermediate bike, and it's an expert bike. It crosses all those genres better than anything I have ever seen. And you can get this in a low boy version too. So with Beta, they have a BYOB. It's build your own. It's not bring your own beer. It's build your own Beta, and they will let you order that as a lowered version. So you can lower it like 3 inches from its standard height. So let's say you're a woman who's 5'2". Like this would be an incredible bike, or 5'3", 5'4", 5'5", because you could get the bike even lower down past where Kelly is at. And then you could still get a lower seat too. I mean, so this is a bike that could literally, you could get it as your first bike. It might be a little, if you've never ridden a bike before, it might be a little much. It just kind of depends on your skeletal structure, right, as a woman. Mm-hmm. But this is a bike that I'm so excited about, and Beta 200RR. If you're looking as an intermediate bike like Shannon is talking about, she could get that bike and never outgrow it. So it's got more tractability than that WR that she's looking at. It weighs less. It will feel lighter. I can't think of a single thing about the Beta that I don't like better, or that I don't like more than that WR, especially for a woman rider. Even,
Yeah,
but
I agree.
as a man rider though, I would ride. We took the Beta 200 to 5 miles of hell in Utah. It's not the hardest trail that I've ever been on, but it's widely regarded as one of the hardest trails in the Western United States. Some people think it is the hardest trail. They just haven't ridden some of the other stuff that we've ridden. And we took the Beta 200 there, and it did absolutely stellar.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that, and I agree. My husband has a WR 250, so sometimes I ride that. If I loan my dual sport to, say, a girlfriend, because I have an XT, which the seat is lower on, because that was actually my first bike. So it's easy for me to loan that out, and sometimes I'll borrow his WR, which, on that, I can't touch both my feet down. So I have to, if I come to a stop, I have to get just one foot off one side, basically. And I don't ride that in the woods. I ride that, as a dual sport. But just knowing the seat height of it, stock, I think they're 36.5 inches. I mean, it's a tall bike. It's a tall bike for sure. So for Shannon, I would for sure, if she's thinking about mostly more for trails, but and the Beta comes plated too. So if she's also thinking about something that she can hop on and off of the road with, the Beta is still a better answer. And yeah, I think that'd be a great answer for her.
Yeah, so we nailed it for Shannon. So let's take Angela Raising Hell's question here. So she's at Angela Raising Hell. I'm assuming that's her Instagram tag or handle. I love that, Angela Raising Hell. She has a two-part question, which is slightly different than the question that we just answered. She says, how to pick a second bike and the best ways to lower a bike without sacrificing suspension too much. And this is going to be something that a lot of women deal with, is just they're not quite as tall as the men, and it's tough. Before you answer this, talk about the lowering suspension, I will say that the best motocross riders in the world, after which pretty much all our bikes have been designed, are designed around the riders who are 5'6" to 5'9". The best riders on the planet in the history of off-road dirt biking are almost all of them are under 6 feet. Ricky Carmichael, regarded as the GOAT, he's 5'6", and he rides these full-size bikes. So yes, maybe there are some good reasons for some of the women to want to sacrifice and lower suspension, but I just wanted to color it with that. All of the best supercross riders in the world are 5'9" and under. So Angela says, how to pick a second bike and the best way to lower a bike without sacrificing suspension too much. What do you think, Kelly?
Well, yeah, you and I touched on this before, and I did mention the idea of, I'm not a big fan of just super lowering something as opposed to learning to handle that extra height by dabbing, by reacting with your body, whatever it is. And it takes time to get there. And we did talk about, okay, well, with motocross riders on that suspension, again, they're in the wide open. They're not really going slower. They're not stopping a lot. And so they're on the bike. They have the momentum to stay on the bike and not worry about tipping and stuff like that.
Good point.
But I also want listeners to know or to think about that even riders who aren't motocross riders, who are going through, say, a rock garden, a certain downhill, the best way to do that from a technique standpoint is feet on the pegs. Feet on the pegs, feet on the pegs. I mean, that's how, when you have your weight off the bike and standing. Yes, that's what I meant. So when your weight is off the bike,
I knew what you meant, but we're gonna bring this down one additional level. So feet on the pegs and weight on the pegs while you're standing up. Yes.
Yes, thank you. And squeezing with the knees, not really overly using the arms. What happens is the bike, it's like you let the bike dance through while you stay balanced on it. You let the bike do the work. You let the bike kind of bounce around and rock around while you're balanced on top of it. And so not to jump too forward into anything too advanced, but if that is really the end goal, and that's sort of the ideal way of doing it, why not start to learn some of those techniques, even earlier. So all I'm saying is don't think that you have to be flat-footed for everything. There's a lot you can learn by even picking and choosing where you choose to stop. I mean, sometimes I just have to pull up alongside of a rock or a berm to get my foot down on something. I can't just stop anywhere. And when I get tired and lazy and decide to stop just anywhere, I fall over too. So that's just the way it is. It's being a little more conscious about where you're placing the bike and where you're stopping. And so that's a technique that needs to be worked on as much as, even more so than sitting on a bike and putting it in motion.
Yeah.
That being said, so I bought the Beta 200RR that we just talked about. When I purchased it, I had the mechanics swap out the spring. So you may want to chime in after this and just explain the difference between the spring and, say, like the other areas of suspension. But the spring is just basically over the back tire, and you can swap it out for what weight you are. So if I weighed 200 pounds, the spring would support me potentially, but because I only weigh it would give under my weight. Because I weigh 120 pounds, it doesn't really give. So a lot of ladies might experience this when you're going to a shop and you sit on a bike that's in their showroom, and the bike doesn't move, it doesn't bounce under you or give under you, and so it just feels like crazy, it just doesn't feel like a good fit. That's part of the reason. So when I purchased my Beta, I had the spring swapped out for my weight range, and I rode it all last year, and it didn't quite feel right. I felt like I was stink bugging, which is where you're falling forward.
The rear was still too high.
Yeah, it had to be. And I didn't know what the deal was, but I just was falling forward on a lot of sharp turns. Felt like the bike was slowing up underneath me, and I was getting hung up, and my body was just falling forward. So this past year, I took it to Drew Smith from Works Enduro. And I don't know if you know Drew Smith. I mean, he's a pretty well-known guy. He was an ISDE racer for 20 years with Team USA. He worked in the industry. He worked for Honda. So he's a very knowledgeable guy, and he's based out here in New Jersey. He does suspension setup for a lot of CNCC guys. So he knows what he's doing. I brought my bike to him, and I sat on it put all my gear on, sat on it. He checked the sag. So he ordered me even lighter spring. Came back a week later to pick the bike up, put all my gear on, sat on the bike, and he said, "You know what? We still need to go lighter." So even though I picked the spring that was made for my weight when I bought the bike, when I took it to a specialist, he swapped it out for an even lighter one. Then I came back, and then he had swapped it out for yet another lighter one. So now I'm riding that Beta on that lighter spring. I put some different tires on it, and it's a whole other bike. I'm riding with more confidence than I've ever had. Compared, last year I kind of felt like a mess because I just couldn't, stay upright in certain conditions. But it's totally different. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the difference of a spring versus other suspension. But I'm a fan of doing that, and I didn't affect anything with the ground clearance.
Yeah. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's so good. And you were cutting out there for a second. If that happens again, I'm going to call you back. So I think I was able to pick out most of the things. Sorry that we're working with the COVID stuff. Actually, but with Kelly and I, we're across the country, so we'd have to do a phone interview anyway. But I think I could pick out everything you were saying. If that happens again, I'll just hang up and call you right back.
Okay.
But yeah, what you were talking about is with the springs, and you do want to have a bike that is correctly balanced for your weight. All of these, most of the bikes that I'm riding are set up for riders, kind of in the 150 to 190 pound range. And so if you are lighter than that, and many of the women listeners are going to be lighter than that, you'll want to get a lighter duty spring, and that can be in the forks as well. Like if we put a lighter spring on the rear of the bike, a lot of times it will require some lighter springs in the forks as well to keep the bike in balance. And every rider is going to need something a little bit different, and that's the nice thing about what Kelly did is it took 2 tries. So the first time wasn't quite right, and then she went back and got some help from an actual suspension expert. And if you're going to get into this as your second bike, on your first bike you can probably get away with it. Your second bike and your third bike, you might want to then get a professional to look at this and help you get it dialed in. It's going to cost you some money, but it might save you in the sport, because as you start to grow and things, you might start to be inhibited by maybe the setup of the bike, and setup is everything in this. And so I wholeheartedly agree with Kelly's assessment here. Let's get the bike set up for you. especially on that second bike, because now you're starting to get serious, and we need to make sure the equipment is working well underneath you. So good, very good, very good. Let's move on to Christine's question. So Christine says, I've had 1 year on my first bike. It's a Honda CRF 230, CRF 230. Ready to leap to a dual sport. She's 5'8", 130 pounds. What are your recommendations for Christine here?
Christine, ready to leap to a dual sport. I think she has a lot of choices, actually. A few choices. At 5'8" and 130 pounds, like, I think she could probably do well on that WR 250. I think it's actually WR 250R is the dual sport. Yeah, because she's 5'8". Because I was going to say, before we talked about that bike a little while ago, that's the one my husband has, a little bit on the tall side. At 5'8", I think she'd probably still be okay. That's the one I would potentially go with for her. I've also seen some other ladies actually get into the Himalayas about that size. I've seen a lot of them, and they really seem to like them. Now, I haven't ridden a Himalaya. That's the Royal Enfield. And it's also not exactly, so when she says dual sport, it helps to be clear on what kind of trails she might want to hop on and off of. But if it's a little bit more of, like, say, farm roads, and being maybe even a little bit more on pavement, that's just something to think about with the weight of the bike. So I've seen a lot of girls like the Himalayas. I'm partial to, like, a WR 250. I actually have an XT 250, which I love the way that bike rides too. She might feel like it's a little low at 5'8". So, I mean, that's where I would land. I would land on the WR or the XT 250s.
Yeah, and just some extra color on that. So Yamaha makes a bike that's called the WR250F, which they classify as a cross-country bike. It will not, and that's a great bike. It's one of the bikes that I list as a good starter bike. But then they also have, in the dual sport category, they have the WR250R, which is the one that we're talking about right here. It's going to be street legal with mirrors and signal lights and a tail light holder, and it's going to have DOT approved tires, which DOT is Department of Transportation approved tires. I'm not a huge fan of those tires, but if you're going to ride it on the pavement and on the dirt, and you want to be street legal, that's kind of like the whole thing with dual sporting, I believe, is to be able to do some dirt and some street. You'd be on the WR250R. That's the one you're talking about, right, Kelly?
Yeah. And this is where it's tough to tell what someone's really looking for, because if she means, some people mean dual sport, they mean that something they can ride, like, on the road a little bit more. Some people might mean just something a little bit larger. You know, if she's thinking of this CRF 230 as a trail bike, it's hard to know without talking to her directly, actually, and I should have followed up with her. But some people look at, say, plated dirt bikes, which you could also call a dual sport. You know, so you could get a KTM that has a plate, a Beta that has a plate, and you could then refer to it as a dual sport. So I'm interpreting this as her meaning, you know, more of a street bike, like the WR that we just mentioned, or something like that. But if she's referring to something like a KTM, and again, if you're going long distances, you probably want it more to be a 4-stroke. I know there's people who plate their 2-strokes, but the 2-stroke bike isn't necessarily the bike you want to be riding on a long, say you're going for like a 4 or 5 hour on-road, off-road, just like kind of a relaxing ride that has some pavement and some dirt farm road. So I'm interpreting this as that's what she's looking for. The dual sport bike that's street legal, that can go out for a lengthy cruise and kind of hop on road, off road.
Yeah. No, that's a good distinction. And just to clarify, the reason why I said I don't love the tires on a dual sport bike typically is if it's a tire that has to be Department of Transportation approved for the highway, that means it's not going to kill you on the highway, and it can handle highway speeds, you know, without breaking down when they get hot. Those tires are typically rubbish, as they say across the pond, on dirt. So you have to know that you're going to make some compromises on your tires. It won't be really good on the street, and it won't be really good on the dirt. It'll be just serviceable on both. And that's something that you have to take into consideration. You cannot push a dual sport tire as hard as you can push like a typical off-road tire when you're on the dirt. And same thing goes for this on the street. Your dual sport street tire is not going to be a tire that will perform as well as the tire that you're putting on your Harley or on your, pocket rocket bullet bike type thing. So just know that you're going to be on a tire that has made compromises to be able to do both of these types of terrain, and it doesn't do either of them exceptionally well. That was my caveat there. So
yeah, I think that's a great point to talk about too, because it's one thing to talk about the bikes, and it's kind of a whole nother subject to talk about the accessories.
Yeah.
You know what I
And
mean?
yeah, and to me, where the rubber meets the road, it's something that people, and this isn't one, maybe it will be one of the questions, but to me, the best thing you can do for your bike is put new tires on it. So people usually run tires too long. It is literally where the rubber meets the road, to to use that figure of speech, and it's an important thing. It's the most important thing that you do to your bike is what tires you put on it. And so I just bring that up for a dual sport person thinking about that. So Becca has got a question, and this is kind of her question is more about gear, which I like. So Becca says, what do you recommend for gear for riding dual sports? I was thinking about getting a chest protector, neck brace, potentially knee and elbow pads to go with my standard gear. What do you suggest? Also, how much do you really spend on a good helmet for trail riding? That's from Becca.
Yeah, I like that helmet question. There's such, there is such a range in helmets, and I've kind of covered this a little bit before on my blog. If you look at, if you look at the range of anywhere from a couple $100 up to $600 or even more, but I'd say the general range somewhere between $200 and $600, and just letting girls understand, or newer riders, whoever it is, that the pricing's there for a reason. It's for what the helmets are made of, potentially how much testing they've gone through, what they're really made for, dirt versus street. So we're talking about trail riding in general. If you're an occasional trail rider and you're not blasting through the trails, I don't feel bad saying that you don't need maybe the top of the line helmet. I think you can go with a couple $100 helmet. And I think that if you're someone who's riding faster, if you're racing, if there's a little more risk involved with who might collide with you, or if there are a lot more trees and rocks that you are risk hitting, then obviously go more. So I personally never buy the entry level of helmet. I'll usually buy one of the top ones without getting too excessive. So some of the very, very top ones, that are maybe designed a little more for motocross, where some of these falls are coming from way high. You've seen some really, we've all seen some terrible crashes. If you've Googled it or YouTubed it, seen some of, like Ken Roxon's, crashes from however high he was flying in the air. So a lot of the top line helmets might be made with protection for that kind of scenario. So save for that, I don't feel personally like I need the super, super top. I'll usually go for maybe just under that, and it's vague because it's different based on which manufacturer you're talking about. But usually I'll go for one of the higher level, if not the highest. So, and on street, if I'm riding dual sport and street, I personally like having a Snell rated helmet. That's just the thing that I like, and this Snell rating is an extra third party that rates helmet safety. So you have all helmets that are DOT approved, Department of Transportation, and that's legally what you have to be having on when you're on the road. Snell is a whole other organization that does maybe more thorough or rigorous, or has higher levels of testing. So I like that, and I'm hesitant to speak because I know there's debates between people of what they think is better or more accurate. I think at some point you just have to pick what you feel safe with, what you trust, and go with that. So on-road, off-road, I want a Snell helmet, and that's usually up in the 600 at least range. And on dirt, I'm usually going for like a $400 or $500 helmet. But if you're a casual recreational rider, I think $200-$300 on a helmet is not bad.
Yeah, I would just add that if you find a helmet and it is not rated for DOT, I would just throw that one to the side because you can get a DOT rated helmet for $200. And
Hmm.
that just means that they have actually gone through the testing to make sure it meets the standards of at least the U.S. government here. I think in Europe it's like ECE. I did a post on this
Yeah.
once. But anyway, yes, I agree with what you're saying. Snell would be ideal. And whether or not Snell is better or not, I've got some helmets like 6D helmets and even a Fly Formula. I don't even think it's Snell rated, but I think that they're putting the best technology in these helmets that there is for off-road riders. So 6D has a great helmet. The Fly Racing Formula helmet is great. These are $500-$600 helmets. I've purchased 2 or 3 of them in the last year because to me it's insurance for my head. But I also do have other helmets that are $200-$300 helmets, and I've used them and I've been fine. And I've been knocked out before. So just know that what you're buying is insurance for your brain. It is the most important thing that you can put on because your brain doesn't heal like other parts of your body. And after that, I think the best money that you can spend is in your boots. I firmly believe that your boots are going to take more damage than your helmet. I know they will. And so that's a place that I wouldn't scrimp. So she's asking about chest protectors, neck braces, all of these things. The thing that I would say to Becca is I agree with everything that Kelly said, but the money that you want to spend, and I'm going to throw out some numbers here. I'm going to say you're going to need to spend, for a lot of people, somewhere between $700 and $1,000, and all we're going to buy with that money is our helmet and our boots. Those are where we're going to get injured. Like it's not a matter of if you hurt your foot, it's when you hurt your foot or when you hit your foot on a rock or a root or something like this. I hit my feet on things every bloody time I go out.
Yeah.
I don't always hit my head on things. And usually I'm hitting my head off a tree branch or whatever. I'm hitting my head like crazy, taking crazy amounts of hits, with just like little branches and things. But my feet hit stuff every single time I've ever been on a dirt bike. And so we're talking about chest protectors. Yeah, that's good. Neck brace, we could go either way. Elbow pads, knee pads, all these things are good, but the money needs to be spent on your helmet and your boots. Is there anything else you would add to that?
No, I mean, I agree. First and foremost, helmet and boots. I know, yeah, helmet I think is something that stumps a lot of people because of that price range. But I think that's all they need to understand is you need to pick what you're comfortable with and assess the relative risk of how you are riding. For most people, recreational riding, kind of putting around, you don't necessarily have to go for that high level helmet. You're not moving at very fast speeds, or there's no one really around you if you're not racing, that kind of thing. But the boots, I agree, and I know that boots are such a tricky issue for women, myself included, because a lot of the top line boots that are made, that are like the best for racing, super protective, they don't really make them very small. They frequently don't make a women's model, or their men's models don't go small enough. So I've definitely struggled trying to find some boots that have that sturdier level for high risk situations, that have, I like a metal toe for that kind of situation. I like a very sturdy boot. I have a pair of Gurneys that are the only model that they made. They're men's, that went down to like a men's size 6. I'm a women's size 7, so I've got a tiny foot. But and they're still roomy on me, but and they're very heavy. It's tricky. Women, I know that if you're anything a size 9 or lower, you kind of have a really hard time finding the top of the line type of protective boot. But out of the options that you do have, you just need to try to find something that is sturdier than another, and sometimes that takes ordering a few pairs and trying them on, and kind of picking and choosing from there. I tend to like the metal boot because I feel like the metal toe, things like that, and a stiffer foot, because I find that some of the softer ones just break in so easily, that they're really comfortable, but they break in so easily. They just don't really protect you very much. I mean, I've been riding and had my foot, get caught under an exposed root and just smush create an entire bruise on my instep. And so I just look for that stiffness all over the whole thing, which can be hard to get used to. It can be a little uncomfortable. But I mean, that's just, I think, the choices are limited for women, unfortunately.
Wow. So this is where it's eye opening. So I'm sitting in front of my computer and I hadn't even contemplated that specific thing. I just pulled up Rocky Mountain ATV, which is where I buy most of my parts and accessories and things and gear. I just pulled it up and I look for Garnet SJ10, and yes, you've got down to size 9 in men's, and then they're listing a size 6. So they go 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And so you're right. There isn't a woman size here. And I looked for CD boots, like the other boots that I use. They didn't have anything lower than a size 10. Then I looked for the I should look at Fox Instinct, but it's the same. You're right. They're not.
Yeah.
They don't really have sizes down below what or in the range that women are going to need. You are nail on the head, sister.
Yeah, I've been wanting CDs for a few years because that's what my husband wears. So he has said from the very beginning, he said, "I love these boots. They're the best in the world, whatever." I have been looking for them for years. They did release a women's size at one point in time, but they've all been sold. That was years ago, and they've all been sold out, and they were this ugly, like pink and white.
Well, I see on CD's website, they offer a woman's line here, and they're showing European sizes because CD is, I think it's an Italian company. But then I don't see where I can buy that. It's like the Vertigo. They've got the CD Vertigo 2 and then the CD Performer LEI. And then they even got an X3 LEI, which is a woman-specific boot here, but I don't know where to buy that. I mean, it's on their website.
That's the one. And is it white and pink?
Yeah, well, this one's white and gray. But yeah,
oh, okay.
So yeah. They've got it white and gray. So it doesn't do the pink. But I don't know where you buy this. This looks awesome. It looks like their CD Crossfire SRS, just for a smaller version of it. But I don't know where you'd get it.
Yeah, so it's really tough, and like me and all the girls that I know that ride, it's just an ongoing question of what boot to be wearing. So I know a lot of girls are looking at Alpine Stars. Fox Women does make their comp boot, but again, I think, and they're great. I actually enjoy wearing them, but in a high risk scenario, I want like the metal toe, and I want a little bit sturdier. I've had, some of my other boots that I love riding and casually, they just break in so much that I, could potentially get, not sure that's what I want for another scenario. So again, it depends. Yeah. What can you find? And then how much are they? The Fox boots are actually really great, and they're only, I think they're $299 regular retail price.
Yeah, the Fox women's comp boots are $189. I'm looking on Rocky Mountain ATV, and they do have them in pink.
Oh yeah, that's what every girl wants, right?
Well, they have them in black and pink. And that might be your best option as a woman, but they have them, it looks, in size. Well, look. Oh, yeah, they got size 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 in women's.
Yeah.
So.
And I do really like that boot. That's the boot I wear for just, all my local everyday riding. Very comfortable.
But you want something a little bit beefier, and I get that. See,
something for races, something for higher, just higher stakes area, something like that.
So what about setup? Let's move into that. So Claire MWW says, how to set up suspension for rocks versus sand. What's your idea there?
I don't know. I've posted a blog before with help from local KTM shop here, Solid Performance. They're based in Downingtown, PA. They are a great suspension shop as well. So they supported my last event. They came out and set sags and did mechanical maintenance and everything like that. So we partnered on a blog about this because what I wanted girls to be able to do with the motocross track event is have the repetition and regularity of the terrain that if they wanted to mess with their clickers of their suspension, that they could. And so that's one thing. And I personally have never done it. I like a stiff suspension. I don't really like riding in sand too much. We ride wooded trail rocks all the time, and I like my stiffer suspension. So for me right now, I leave it as is. And if I were to go, say, down south and ride a little more sand, I don't think I personally would monkey with it too much. It's up to the rider. So if this person really wants to do that and hone that in, I recommend that they do this exercise that we posted on our blog. And basically what it means is if you have the clicker settings on your suspension, which those clickers are at the top of the forks, there's little kind of like a little wheel that can be rotated left or right. And then there's usually a little wheel on the back compressor as well. And I think it varies by bike, of course. And you would have to, they recommend to start it at the stock level. So there's a stock level that you can find usually in your owner's manual, or you can certainly go online and try to find what that is. And you start there. And then you do an exercise.
It'll be a certain number of clicks. So what you'll do is you'll turn them all the way counterclockwise, which is closed. And then if your stock setting says 10 clicks, you close the suspension by turning it in tight, righty-tighty. Don't force it. This is finger tight is what we're talking about. And then if it says 10 clicks is the standard setting, then you'd count 10 clicks counterclockwise back out to get to your standard setting.
Okay. Yeah. So that's something like that. Then you're at the standard. And then like our blog kind of walks you through, you ride for about 15 minutes on that setting. And then you might go, 3 clicks in one direction and ride again for another 15 minutes, and then go another 3 clicks and then ride again. And so you're keeping track and doing a slow, subtle exploration of how the clicks make you feel. Then you can go back to standard and go back the other direction. It's probably a little bit of a time-consuming thing, but all things considered, it's the necessary time that you would spend to set your bike up for how you like it. And you just have to commit that time to riding in the terrain and being able to, to turn these clickers and find these settings. And as long as you keep track of where it's at and you know where you are, that is something that every rider can do for themselves. And it can make a big difference. So it's not about completely dialing everything. 1 click can make a huge difference to how you feel. 2 clicks. So just putting in the time to riding in one particular type of terrain and then putting in that time for another and finding the clicks that you like, that's what the rider, what is it, Claire? That's what she would, that's what I recommend that she do to find those different settings.
Yeah, that's good advice. I've also heard people say one of the other ways you can do this is just go all the way on the clicker. So let's say you can do a few clicks here and ride for 15 minutes. The other way for you to get an idea of what this actually feels like on the bike is turn the clickers all the way soft. So you're in the standard position, maybe it's 10 clicks out, and we're just talking about compression here. There's compression and rebound, which is a different deal. But if you take your compression and you turn that all the way out, which is softening the compression, aka speeding up the speed at which the fork can compress, then you ride it for a few minutes. You're like, oh, so that's what compression is. And you can kind of get an idea for what that does for you and why. I always think about the fork and the shock about how fast it can move. What we're doing with our clickers is we're modulating how fast it can move. There's oil inside of there. There's valves inside of there. And with the clickers, you get to fine-tune within a certain range how fast or slow the fork can compress and how fast it can rebound. And so the compression is modulating how fast the fork can move up into itself, and then the rebound is modulating how fast it springs or rebounds back out to its, full length. And so I agree, the best thing you could do is try to figure out what compression and rebound really is and what that does to you on the bike. And the only way to really know is to go out there and trial and error. What I like, some other person might not like. I can get on guys' bikes when they say, hey, this thing is dialed completely, and I absolutely positively hate it. But they like it. And so are they wrong or am I wrong? No, it's just everyone's a little bit different, so you gotta put the time in. So next question here is from Guatemala. So it's probably Molly, but she's calling herself Guatemala. She says, it's at Guatemala. She says, handlebar lengths. I always wonder if they make bikes to specifically accommodate women. Oh, we lost you. I'm going to call you back.
Hello.
Kelly. Okay, perfect.
Sorry about that.
I got you back. So Guatemala's question is this one. She says, handlebar lengths. I've always wondered if they make bikes to specifically accommodate women's frames, shoulders, torso, etc., or should we be applying similar alterations to handlebar positioning and length? What's your thought on this one?
Well, first, I thought it was interesting. I just saw you post that I think right now you're testing out a bunch of different handlebars, right, on your
Yeah.
KTM. It's interesting. So it's something that we don't really talk about very much, but different handlebars, different handlebar lengths, and what is available. And it's just funny, do they make them to specifically accommodate women's frames, like narrower ones? And I know there are some people who cut them down. I don't know if that's a better way or worse way. I've definitely ridden some other people's bikes where the handlebars were shorter, were maybe cut down. And there's definitely a different feel. I mean, I find it personally a little awkward when they're too small. So I don't know if it's really, I mean, obviously I'm sure that relates to your average height and weight and where you feel comfortable. But I would also think that it's maybe more of a personal preference as well. And I think one of the best ways is probably when you're setting up your bike to, if you're not liking the handlebars that you currently have, or you don't feel like your upper body is in the positioning that you would like it to be, is maybe order a couple of slightly different shaped handlebars and sort of sit on your bike and kind of hold them there and see which one feels natural. And that's, again, my non-really expert advice is just the best thing for me was when a mechanic said to me, well, you're the one riding it, so trust yourself. And I sat on it and I kind of adjusted the bars to where it felt like good and natural as long as I was in good form. And that's where we kept them. And that wasn't really about length. That was about whether or not they were rolled back or straight in line with the forks. But still, I would think that the same practice would apply. I think that it all comes down to how you connect with the bike, and your kinesthetic awareness, which is like just how you feel in your body, whether your arms feel wide or you feel like your elbows are adequately up or your back is straight. And I think everybody's a little different. And so I think if you had a choice of trying a few different handlebars out and you're working on that setup, then, why not play with a few different ones and see how you feel and, return the ones that you're not going to use. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, it's funny because I spent all day yesterday messing with handlebars, and I need to continue to wrap that up. And I don't want to spoil what I learned yesterday, but I bought 4 different handlebars, so I spent about $400, and then I've got obviously the handlebars on my stock bike, and then I own 5 full-size dirt bikes, and so I was looking at all of them, and it was really kind of staggering. I just basically did my own little education yesterday on handlebars, and I learned several things. The thing that I would say to Guatemala is, yes, I think you should buy a couple different types of bars. They're going to cost you about $80 a pop, between 60 and $90 a pop, somewhere right in the 80 range. And this is the only way you're going to learn. The other thing that you're going to find out is that just the position of your bars, how far they are rotated in the clamps, is going to make a massive difference. So if you rotate those bars just forward or back, just a little bit, the ones that you have on your bike, it will change the overall feel of the bike. And then I would say you should go out and ride the thing and ride it for at least 10, 15 minutes with the bar in that position. I did that yesterday. It was absolutely eye-opening, to like, I'm just going to rotate. I've got this bar on this specific one. I'm just going to rotate it just a couple. And they have little lines and notches on lines that are painted onto them so you can kind of get a reference point. You rotate that thing just a teeny bit, the entire front end of the bike changes. You might start blowing corners, or you might start cornering like a dream just by changing the rotation. So I don't know. I'm not a big cut my bars down type of person. I think that happens more with people who are in woods riding where it's super tight trees. Back out here in the West, we don't have a lot of super tight trees. So there's not a good reason for me to cut my bars down and make them narrower because I like the extra leverage that I get with the wider handlebars. So yeah, it's a good question that she has, but I think she's just going to have to, like the suspension thing, she's going to have to go out there and try a few things. Here's the other thing I would say though. Most of the handlebars on most modern bikes are really, really good. There's not a reason to get an aftermarket handlebar unless you've bent yours. I personally don't think there is, because I think you can probably just roll the bars forward or back and get an idea of, hey, I like this more. When we start talking about, there's so many different handlebar sweeps and bends and rises, it is overwhelming. It's crazy. Like if you start to go with different bars. So the first thing I would suggest she does is just start playing with them forward and backward, and then maybe go out and buy a bar or two It's going to take you time because now you got to do all your controls. It takes you at least 25 minutes to take the controls off your bike, put the new bar on the bike, and get the controls back on. The reason why I know that is because I did it like 60 times yesterday. So it took me all day long from like 8 in the morning until 8 at night, and I'm still not done. And all I was trying to do was test 5 bars. So,
wow.
But I think she can do it. She doesn't have to do 5 bars, but if she just starts rotating bars, a little forward, a little back, she's going to learn a ton. Pay special attention to where your hands are in relationship to the top of the forks. This is going to be everything. Your bars, if you rotate them towards you, you're rotating them down closer to the bike, and you're rotating them closer to your body. When you rotate your bars forward, you're getting them further away from your body, your hips, but you're also pushing them forward in relationship to the top of the forks, and it is staggering what just rotating the bars can do for you in your riding.
I could say the same. I just remember when I'm setting up the last bars, just even a half a centimeter, there's like a centimeter of rotation, just put it in the zone where it felt good for me, that kind of thing. So yeah.
It's huge. Ricky has a question. She says, what are the most basic bike maintenance things to learn and do yourself? She says, will my bike fall apart or die if I have no idea how many hours are on it? Good question, Ricky.
The hours question is probably a better one for you, because I don't think I've ever ridden anything and like far enough to that point where I've had to worry about it. But first, the basic bike maintenance things to learn and do yourself. I've covered this as well. I have a good blog post for it. Just post-bike maintenance, always cleaning the bike, washing after every ride, and not just washing it, but actually going over it, getting into every little crevice if you can, and going over all of the bolts. Make sure you see that bolts are still there, see if something's been damaged, see if parts are bent, see if things are tight enough, going over it with a screwdriver, making sure all your bolts are kind of retightened again. That's super basic. WD-40. I think people should always be spraying a mist of WD-40 on their bike after a wash to get rid of rust and to protect the bike. Chain scrubbing. So you can get a chain cleaner and a little chain brush and scrub your chain off. That's another super easy one. Chain lube. So once you're done cleaning it, putting the lube on there and running it around running the chain around. I'd say that's a handful of the most basic things that everybody should be doing. Can you think of anything else?
Yeah, so I did it. I published it maybe 5 days ago. I have on my channel on Dirtbike Channel on YouTube, 13 best post ride maintenance tasks.
Great.
And this is something that I think everyone should be doing. And it doesn't matter whether you're female or male. These are things that you need to do pretty much every ride. And you hit on most of them. Just talking about, in fact, I think you hit on all of them pretty much. There might be one or two. But yeah, getting the bike washed. And this is where you're looking for broken parts, looking for loose bolts, these types of things. Those everyone should be doing. And then the other thing I would say is learn to do tires yourself. This is going to be a frustrating one in the beginning. It was frustrating for me. And every once in a while, it still is frustrating. But the problem is if you don't learn how to change your own tires, you are going to run your tires too damn long. Sorry to swear, but that's how I feel about it. Because you're going to have to take it to a shop. And if you have to take it to the shop, that means it's an extra cost. It's an extra hassle. You can get the tires delivered right to you, and then you can run the tires and you can change them out yourself. So my thing is, yes, you need to know how to change your oil and do those things. And then there's going to be this one that you're going to hate me on. You're going to say, Kyle, why are you telling me to change my own tires? I'm just saying, if there's one thing that has paid more dividends in my maintenance than anything else, it is going through the pain and the bloody knuckles and the, whatever of learning to do my own tires. Everything else as far as maintenance that I have learned how to do pales in comparison to knowing and being confident to change my own tires. So that's what I would say to Ricky. and she might hate me for it, but that's my answer.
Well, she might do it.
I hope she does. I hope
Great,
I hope everyone does. If you get the right tools, just some spoons that aren't sharp, you can get these things for like $10 a pop on Rocky Mountain ATV or Motorsport. Get yourself the right spoons. You need 3 or 4. You can't really do it with 2, especially if you don't have the strength in your hands. You're going to need 3 of them. I've got some videos on that. There's a lot of good videos out there about changing tires, whether it's tubes or tubeless or things. But I think that's the thing for me. I would be like, yeah, anyone can wash your bike, but you're talking about bike maintenance to learn and do yourself. Do tires. Figure that one out. So then at Dirty Bike Girl, her Instagram handle, at Dirty Bike Girl, she says, tubeless tires, good, bad, should I get them? What do you think?
I don't know. I don't ride with tubeless tires, and that goes back to maybe years ago where I asked one of my friends of mine who's a mechanic, older guy, been riding his whole life, and first time I heard about tubeless, I said, so what's the deal with tubeless tires? And to quote his exact words, he said, that is not the hot ticket out here.
How old? And he's how old was he? He's stuck in his ways.
Yeah, he's about 70.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, but been in the industry for a long time. Worked on bikes, worked for manufacturers, developed steering dampeners. So he knows things. He knows a lot of things. So I didn't know how to interpret it exactly, but he didn't really explain it to me. But what I gathered from it was there's just a difference between the kind of very sharp, rocky terrain that we're riding. What I was riding with him was more upstate New York, a lot of just rocks, very sharp rocks, versus maybe some of the smoother rock that's out west. So we didn't elaborate on it. So I've never used a tubeless because the advice that I got from him was it, wouldn't necessarily help me on the very, very sharp rocks that we were riding.
See, and I disagree with him 100%. I think that the sharper the rocks are, the more important tubeless would be. We have a lot of sharp rocks out here.
Okay.
But to answer Dirty Bike Girl, I just like saying that, Dirty Bike Girl's question. Tubeless adds another level of complexity. So I'm a huge tubeless fan, but let me tell you why you wouldn't want to use tubeless. If you're the person that doesn't want to check tire pressure every time you go ride, don't get tubeless. Because tubeless adds another level of complexity where you're checking a high pressure chamber and a low pressure chamber, and most of the time your low pressure chamber is probably going to leak somewhat. Most of and I've installed it on maybe more, I don't know, I might have installed more tubeless than anyone in the country, or at least I'm getting up there. Because I install it on all of my bikes, and I've done it for many different friends, and different people have paid me to do it as well. Tires are gonna leak a little bit. If you just use tubes straight up the way that most bikes come, they're a little less finicky. But the downside is you have to run a higher pressure, especially in those sharp rocks that you're talking about, because you can get a pinch flat like that, especially as the speeds get higher. And so the basic tried and true standby is tubes. I would say you could get a heavy duty tube in your tire and it would work better than just the standard tubes that will come in your bike stock. If you want the ultimate in flat protection, you would just get a moose bib. Moose bibs are hard to install. They're expensive and they weigh a lot. But if you're one of those people that say, I cannot accept a do not finish in this race that I've just entered, moose bib is probably going to be your best bet, but they can fail too. Moose bibs are not without failures because rim locks can fail. And then if you have a catastrophic failure on a moose bib type tire, it is worse than the failures that you can have on the other types like tubes and tubeless. It's just that the catastrophic failures on mooses don't happen that often. But when they do, you're done. You cannot even move the bike. But anyway, I would just say tubeless, good or bad. Tubeless is good and it is bad. I think that for me, it is the best mod that I do to my bikes, but I've gone through the pain of learning how to use them. There's a learning curve with it, and if you're not interested in experiencing another learning curve with tires, I would just say stick with your tubes. You're probably going to be better off.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. It's funny how you hear one thing, and like for me, you just go on years. Like I said, it was one sentence there I said, hey, what about tubeless? Nah. And so it's interesting to actually just dive back into it and talk about it. So I'm really glad personally that one came up, because I never never dug any deeper on it personally.
Yeah, and I find this and I started to paint with a broad brush, but I find that the longer you've been in the industry, the less open you are to tubeless, because you're like, oh, I've been in the industry long enough, and I'm not going to learn new things. Like, we've already figured out these things.
Okay, maybe that's why.
and so that's why I said, how long have you been in the industry? Because I have found that the longer you've been in the industry, the less likely you are to think tubeless is a good thing.
Okay, that would make sense.
You're just, and especially if you have any relationship to any of the tire manufacturers out there, you're going to be like, no, this is crap. So if you work for Dunlop or Bridgestone or any of these people, you're going to say tubeless is crap. That's just that is the going. That's the talking point. But it isn't crap. It's just adds an extra level of complexity, and for some people, they don't want that. And so I would say, if you're not having problems. See, I just want to get more performance out of my tires. If I'm running tubes, I've got to run 15 pounds in them. I will get a flat 100%. If I run if I run 10 pounds in my front or my rear tire, I will 100% get a flat on my next ride, because I'm just pushing hard enough that I'm pinching the tubes. And so with tubeless, I'm able to run anywhere from 2 to 7 PSI. And I will tell you that if you run a tire at 15 PSI and then you run that same exact tire at 4, it isn't even the same tire. You know what I mean? It gets so much better performance at 4 PSI than it does at 15 PSI. So to me, I'll take the extra complexity of having to, it's harder to install the first time. Your subsequent tire changes with tubeless are easier than with tubes. It's just so much faster. But the first one is harder to put on. And then you got to check tire pressure every single time. And you're going to lose pressure in the low pressure most of the time. And I'm like, oh, it's a big deal. I'm going to check my tire pressure anyway. Even when I'm riding a tube bikes with my kids, I check tire pressure every time just to make sure. And so,
and that could be one of the reasons too, like where they're riding. It's pretty much, I know they're riding about 14 PSI and all the time. It's not really changing where they are. And I'm just wondering, maybe that was kind of some of the issue too of like, I don't know. I'm super excited to like hear all this information about it, because I've never, dug into it before.
Yeah, it is. It's the best money I've ever spent. It's far, if we take aside just putting new rubber on bikes, tubeless is the thing that has made the most difference in my riding. If I'm only going to spend $200 to upgrade my bike, first I've got to put a skid plate on it, because tubeless costs about $100 a wheel. That's what I'm going to spend. Okay. If you said, Kyle, your bike has, it's got a skid plate on it already, but it's bone stock. You have $200. What are you going to do to it? There is no question in my mind I'm putting tubeless on it. Like, I make that decision in a nanosecond. It will make any suspension better, and it will make any tire better every single time. But it's not
maybe
like,
I'm going to try it.
I think if you don't, you're doing yourself a disservice. And you might not like it. You might not like the extra complexity or whatever, but if it's installed correctly, it can be a game changer. So let's go to technique. We've got just a couple more questions here. We've got a question from, is this C-Tick? Is it C-Ticktin? At C-Ticktin?
Yep. Yeah.
She says, how do you recommend adjusting for a bike that you can flat foot to a bike that is taller? What do you have to tell her?
Yeah, so I actually messaged her to clarify what this meant. Did she mean adjusting the bike, or did she mean adjusting herself? So what I found is that she was on a TTR 125, which again is one of those bikes we mentioned earlier as being one of the best starter bikes. So that was a great bike for her. TTR 125. And then she wanted to move up to something bigger. I know she felt like she was outgrowing that TTR 125. So she got a 250 that is, I had to look it up actually because I had never heard of it, but it's a Chinese manufacturer that GPX 250.
Yeah.
Is that it?
I've seen them. Yep.
Okay. I was not familiar. I hadn't seen them. I had actually Google that and look that up. And it's basically, I guess, like a similar bike to like a Yamaha, probably similar to what the 250 F. You think?
It was she's riding like that. The counterpart to that would be a YZ250. So it's not quite as tall, but it is a 2-stroke. I believe if it's the one I'm thinking of. Maybe she has a 4-stroke version of it. The one I've seen is a 2-stroke 250, which is crazy jump. But maybe she's got the 4-stroke version of it.
I want to guess 4-stroke because she didn't really mention any trouble other than like the height. I mean, she was specifically talking about, height going from flat foot to something like that. And what she said is she just found that she was having more trouble with it than she really thought she would. And that to me makes perfect sense. That is a big jump, and especially just even in the height. But it's funny when we talk about height, it's a bike size. It's not just the height, it's the weight, and it's also the distribution of weight. And I know this can get really overwhelming for girls who are trying to find that next model bike, but that's exactly why we're talking about this is, that 250 that she has is not only however many inches taller, it's probably considerably heavier, and I'm going to guess that it's a little bit top heavy as well. I'm going to guess, and I've ridden a YZ250F. Not that I consider that top heavy, but it was, it was different than like my Beta.
Yeah.
When I think about my Beta at 215 pounds, when it falls and I have to pick it up, it doesn't feel like 215 pounds. The way the weight is distributed,
it's lower. Lower in the bike.
It's lower. Yeah, they say that the same thing about like the KTM free rides where there's a little more trials influence to them. They have a lower center of gravity. So picking that up off the ground or supporting it on an angle, it's just a totally different scenario than something like this bike. So while, we're kind of talking about height, I think there's maybe an all over issue here with handling the height, handling the weight, and then being able to handle it without having the speed that you would need to support all of that. Does that make sense how I said support all of that? Like obviously when you go faster, the things stay in motion, it stays standing up. When you're moving slower, it's that much harder. You slow up and it's that tip of the weight that's pulling you over with it.
Yeah.
So I think that's what she's struggling with.
Yeah, and I think I just looked it up. It's gpxmoto.com. It's probably what she's got. And I think she maybe has the FSE 250E, which is the 4-stroke version of their 250. The 2-stroke is the 250R. It's TSE 250R. So she's likely got the FSE. I guess F stands for 4-stroke. FSE 250E is what she's probably got in that Chinese bike line. And it's a little cheaper. It's like $3,500 new. So, but yeah, I think that you've hit the nail on the head. It's just the extra weight and the extra height that it's going to have coming off of her TTR. So,
yeah. So as far as recommending for adjusting for that, there isn't too much. I wouldn't want to tell her to put too much more money to the bike if it's just not really the right fit for her. If she did want to put any money into it, I guess you would see if there were lowering capabilities or a different seat. But then she's still dealing with potentially an amount of weight that isn't going to make her trail riding any easier.
Yeah, and it's going to be tough for her to find a different seat for that bike because it's one of these fringe brands. So that I doubt she's going to be able to find something that she can lower the seat. She can probably lower the suspension if she takes it to a suspension person. But they might be looking at the bike for the first time. I've never actually laid eyes on one in the flesh, these Chinese bikes. I've seen some reviews on them.
Yeah, and, same here. I mean, so then if I were to give her any recommendations of other bikes, again, we go back into that kind of question we talked about earlier, which is what makes for that great, like, next bike, that second bike. And, I see a lot of girls who have moved on to the either KTM or Husqvarna, the 150s, which now they have the 150i or the TPI, which have the oil injection. Some of them are fuel injected, great bikes. Same thing with my Beta, the 200RR. And I know with all of those bikes, we're looking at a higher price point, 8,000 to 10,000, depending on what you are then doing to it. So that can be, that's obviously at least double what, if she had bought this bike for $3,000-$4,000. So it's tricky. There's not a lot of that in between. So, if you were willing to say part with that bike and get a different bike, I'd go back to recommending either the Beta X Trainer or the Beta 200RR for her.
Yeah.
If you were staying in that price range, what could have been better? Maybe the Honda CRF 230, even though, there's still an amount of weight there, but
It might be lower.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It might be lower to the
Yeah,
ground. My
it
gut
might
feeling
be.
is the Chinese bike is probably a little taller than the Honda 230.
Yeah,
I mean, just food for thought for her is, um, some of this stuff just there's no shortcut to some of these things other than just seat time. So the best things
yeah,
that she could possibly do at this point is put gas through the tank and time on the seat, and just get more and more comfortable with it. And try to keep her elbows up, and try to make sure, like, pay attention to where she's going and stop only in places where she can, reach a little bit easier. Maybe there's a little bit higher spot, or there's a rock or something that she can lean up against. Those types of things are going to help a lot. And then realizing that you don't have to put both feet down. I tell this to my sons all the time. All you have to do is put one foot down. So you plan your stops, and you can keep one foot on the peg. Let's say you keep your right foot on the peg and you put your left foot down. If you do that, then a lot of times you can flat foot. And she might be interested to find out that if she keeps her right foot on the peg as she comes to a stop, and then only shifts her weight so she puts one foot down, she might be able to get almost her entire foot down, that left foot, because she's kind of, her butt and her skeleton is kind of, tipped up like
yeah,
you would do if you've got still one foot on the peg. That's what my boys have had to do, and my daughter as well, a lot of it. So, if you don't want to change bikes, then that might be something you just keep going, keep putting one foot down instead of two, and see how that works for a while.
yeah. I mean, and that's really the only answer is seat time. At that point, is just getting used to how to handle it. And I like, and what you said is, I kind of said that earlier. Is just you have to be maybe a little more conscious about where you stop. Stop where you can put a foot on something. Exactly what you said. And if she got out and practiced that, I'm sure she would lock in that muscle memory to feel a little more confident of at least not questioning what to do when the bike's in motion and then suddenly has to stop. If she kind of, if she's constantly repeating it or practicing both sides, because I do that when I'm on my husband's dual sport, which is very tall for me. My stops are obviously always on my left leg, but if I were to, for whatever reason, get wobbled the other way, if a car swerved at me and I wobbled the other way, I'd want to make sure I could get my right foot down. So it's the same thing on trails. You never know which way a certain rock's going to bounce you, that you have to get that foot down. So that's maybe a good drill for her too, is having the feet on the pegs and stopping at a point where she puts herself a little side saddle and gets her left foot down, and then can get back up and go again, and then do it on the right side. And maybe that's a good drill that she could do, out in the yard or something like that, and kind of practice getting herself side saddle.
Yeah. Very good. So let's move on to our last question that we've got time for. It looks like we've got it. It's from Not Lost. She's at Not Lost Exploring. It took me a little while to figure that out. I think it's at Not Lost Exploring. All one word, obviously. She says, how can I feel more in control while riding downhill? And the second part of the question is, how do I get better at using my clutch while riding?
I was very excited for the downhill question, because I feel like it's a question a lot of girls have, or a fear that a lot of girls have is the downhill. And for me now, I love downhills. And I think it was difficult for me at first because I was on a small bike back then. So I was on like an XR 100, which is very small. There's not much to grip with the legs, and the body weight when you're standing, my body weight would be so forward. I would just feel like, how am I supposed to do this without, I would just slide forward on the bike. So it took me a lot of years to realize that now that I'm on a full size bike, it's actually a lot easier because there's more for me to grip my legs with. There's a little more to the bike to work with. But I love the question because I think it's something a lot of women struggle with. The downhills are intimidating. And I think for me, the number one things have been gripping with my knees, having very good control with all controls simultaneously. So, there's times where I have to have my right toe on the rear brake, a little bit of feathering on the front brake, working with the clutch, but also kind of hitting the throttle a little bit to keep the engine going, depending on how slow I'm taking it down a hill. So I think those are great things to practice, is being able to use like kind of all controls at the same time. And another thing is this gripping with the knees, squatting down low. And for me lately, I'm just trying to push my weight a little bit further back, because I'll tend to look forward and slide forward and fall forward because I'm a very forward rider. And I've realized that I'm ending up putting up a little too much pressure on my front forks, which is one of the issues I was having. So now that I just kind of pull it back even a half inch or an inch, it's just so much easier.
Yeah. No, I like that. I would say to her, stand up on the bike. The steeper the hill, and it's going to seem counterintuitive, but the steeper the hill, you need to be standing. Push your weight back as far as you can. Keep one foot on the clutch, one foot I put my fingers up in what I call attack position. So I've got a finger on the clutch and a finger on the brake. And I'm feathering the front brake and the rear brake to control my speed. And it's a balance between the two. You don't really, if you can handle it, you don't want to lock up your rear wheel. Sometimes you can't help. Sometimes it's just like, I've got to be stepping on my brake. But you can keep it rolling, keep the tires rolling. Don't lock them up if you can. And then the last thing that I would mention is just when it gets super nasty, like if all of a sudden the bottom of the hill, it gets really nasty and you get bumped offline, my suggestion in that case, a lot of times, is let go of the brake and let that sucker roll. Because here's one thing I've noticed. The tires don't do two things at once very well. What I mean by that is they can steer, they can control you, or they can slow you down. Now, there's obviously a little bit of crossover. It can slow you down, and it can control you at the same time. But more often than not, you have the most control of your front wheel when you're not braking. So you'll notice, like, if you come into a corner, people want to brake hard into a corner when you're still going straight, and then as soon as you initiate the turn, you let off the brake and let it roll. Same thing happens if you're going down a really steep, nasty downhill. If you get bumped offline and you're now going over into the holy shiz part of the trail, which is just off the side of it, my experience is it's better to get off the brake and then just trust your skills, trust the fact that you're standing up, and you'll probably be able to roll through it. You would be amazed the things that you can roll through with the front tire if you're not on the brake. If you are on the brake really hard and you hit a big rock that kind of like deflects your tire or whatever, the second that it loses contact with the ground because of that big rock or whatever, then the tire will stop because it's not in connection with the ground anymore, and you're on the brake hard, and now you've just skidded the front wheel, and then when it comes back down in connection with the ground, it doesn't roll anymore because it's already stopped, or it's already slowed down too much relative to your speed going down the hill, and now you break all traction, and you are going down. And so my thought is, all the things that Kelly said, stand up, shift your weight back, feather both brakes, and if something goes wrong at the end and you're thrown offline and you're coming to those rocks and you're saying those swear words in your mind, let go of the brake and just roll the thing and let it roll, and you'll probably make it through. You'll make it through better than if you're still pinching that brake, because the last thing you want to do is lock up that front wheel. That is mission number one on going on a steep downhill, is do not skid the front wheel. That's where most of your stopping power is going to be. But this is a feel thing. If you lock the front wheel going down the hill, you will crash 100%.
Yeah, and I could say the letting go and rolling down is even that much more successful and less intimidating when you do have your weight back.
Yeah, and standing.
So
yeah.
All of this, I mean standing. Sorry, you're so much more eloquent than I am. I feel like I'm skipping over stuff, but yeah, definitely standing. And as you approach the hill, you should be standing and pulling that weight a little bit back so that you are not pushing on the front handlebars. Will make everything else that much easier. So even the letting go and letting it roll, if your body weight's not on it, you'll have the control to feel successful in letting go and rolling.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
If it's a really steep downhill, you're pushing your butt out over the back fender. Like I'm talking about you're pretty much locking. I don't want to say you lock your elbows, but you have your elbows nearly locked and you're pushing back away from your handlebars as far as you can, and then you're shifting your hips and your butt back so that you're getting your weight over the rear wheel. That's what we want. We've already got our weight biased to the front wheel on a steep downhill. What we want is to be able to not put additional compression on the forks and get us to tip over frontwards. We don't want to go over the bars frontwards. There's plenty of weight on the front wheel when we're on a downhill already. So we want to shift it back by putting our arms basically locked out, and you get your butt over that fender. Stick it out as far as you can. And the only way this is possible is standing up. So really good question. I love it. Any thoughts about the clutch aspect of this? Getting better at clutching?
Getting better at clutching. Again, I think it just takes a little bit of seat time and messing with the clutch. For me, one of the best drills was having a nice wide open flat space and practicing keeping the throttle steady and just using the clutch to pull yourself until you could find the spot where it pulls you forward. And maybe this is a little bit more in a 2-stroke than a 4-stroke. I'm not sure. It might vary by bike. But for me on the 2-stroke, it was finding that zone where you're using the clutch to pull you forward instead of just using the throttle to accelerate. So to explain that a little bit better, and this is something I worked on at that motocross event. They have a big, wide open field, and I was trying to tell girls this is just a great place it's the safest environment for trying things out like that, like going a little faster, getting a feel for certain things like that. So for me, in my case, my 2-stroke was still a little bit newish for me, and I would just hit the gas, and instead of giving it more and more gas with the throttle, I would feather the clutch a little bit. I would kind of pull the clutch in until you feel it rev up. You feel it go into higher RPMs, and it actually pulls you forward. And I think that that's a good drill for, a lot of people to play with and find that zone of your clutch where it engages and pull you forward. Because me, having gone from a 4-stroke to a 2-stroke, that was what I had to learn for, say, getting up hills. There are a lot of hills where it's not about letting go of the clutch and just being on the throttle. It's about being on the throttle and using that clutch to pull you up and pull you through some of these choppy areas. So I think that's a good drill for getting used to the clutch. I think I'm trying to think of what else you might be looking for. I always use 2 fingers in the clutch, and I use the clutch quite a bit. Use it to feather your way through rocky trails. Always kind of be using it to navigate your way through things where there's like nuance to the trail, where there's rock and dips and things like that. But if you find that little zone where it engages and disengages, that's where you want to play with it a little bit more to get it to pull the engine along.
Yeah, you made a good point there about the fingers. So with your fingers, you're probably using your index finger and your middle finger to use your clutch, and then you're maintaining the grip of the bar with your ring finger and your pinky, right? Yeah. And if you've got a little bit stronger hand, which what I generally do is I'll just use one finger on the clutch. But if my hand gets tired, I'll go up there and cheat with my middle finger. Some people guys or gals will just use one finger and they'll use their middle finger for the clutch. It's not as common, but it's something that people will do. But it's a good point. Don't use your whole hand for the clutch. If we need to use our whole hand for the clutch, we've got to figure something else out. Maybe we need a new clutch cable, or maybe we need lighter springs in our bike, in our actual clutch pack, so that you can pull that with. And it's okay if you've stopped to use all your fingers to hold the clutch in. But if you're in motion, I would say no more than 2 fingers on the clutch, because we need to maintain control of the bars with those last 2 fingers. That's pretty good. That's very good.
Yeah.
That is very good.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some.
This has been awesome.
I was trying to think of anything to add to that, but that's great. This has been awesome. These are a lot of questions that, I've heard a lot of girls ask, and even, a couple of them that I've always wondered myself and just never took the time to think about or elaborate on. So I hope that this really helped some ladies who want to be riding.
Yeah, for sure. How do people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your events, or just have questions for you and they want to get in touch and get in personal contact with you? How do they do that?
And I love that, by the way. When people, after your last podcast, I got a few messages from people. It's really fun. It's just really fun to talk about and help and give some different ideas. The easiest place to reach me is through my website, which is overandoutmoto.com. I'm also on Instagram at overandoutmoto. So people can direct message me there, or they can contact me through the website using the subscribe form. The email address is info@overandoutmoto.com. So if you remember overandoutmoto.com, you could pretty much find me on any one of those platforms. And I'm at the receiving end. So any questions, I'm always happy to answer, or send people links or, pass them along. If I don't have the answer, I'll pass them along to somebody I think does. So it's always fun to help women get into the sport.
My claim to fame, I'm just scrolling through your Instagram feed on here. There are very few men on your Instagram feed. There might be like one or two. I'm on there. I've got a picture on there with my daughter, and I guess some of these other people could possibly be men because they've got goggles and helmets on and everything. I can't tell, but I'm super proud that I'm one of the only men to be on your feed.
You are. You might almost be like the almost the only man's like face that's seen there.
Yeah, and see, I had my helmet off, and my daughter had her helmet on because she's like, is this going to go on Instagram? And I'm like, I don't know. And she's like, I'm going to keep my helmet on because she didn't want to be seen with me.
Oh, well, now she's on a women's. Now she's on our stage.
Yeah. She's 14, so she was probably worried about what her hair was going to look like or something. But yeah.
Well, obviously, for our Instagram feed, most of what we want to show is obviously the women riding. We do have men who help there. In the background, we have trail support. We have people who help us run our guided dual sports are actually run by a local club called the Del Val Trail Riders, the DVTR. They're an awesome club. Obviously, they're predominantly men. There's a bunch of women in there too, but they're the right kind of people. They are riders who care about riding. Their heart is in the right place, and so I love partnering with them to lead the guided ride because when it comes down to it, it's not about are you a man or woman as far as helping us or participating. The event is for women. We have men who pitch in and help guide and do trail support. But yeah, we focus mostly on the women. But when I shared the picture of you, I wanted to explain to the women, like, send us your photos, send us your questions rather. We're having this discussion, and we don't have to just touch in with other women or female experts just because they're women. It's who is able to help you and give you the right answer. And, for me, I always like talking to you because I feel like you'll get specific and you'll the way that you'll explain some technical things is great. So that's really what we're about. The event's for women, but we like taking, the best knowledge and discussion and conversation and support from just the right kind of person, the person who cares about the sport, the person who's willing to share it, and explain and help and nurture it. So that's where we're at. I'm happy that you were doing this with us. This is awesome.
Yeah, I did. I scrolled a long ways through, and there are some other dudes. So I'm not the only guy in here, but it's been fun. It's been awesome, and at some point maybe our paths will cross and we'll get to ride together. But good job with everything you're doing. Again, I need to maybe reach out to some of the other groups that are doing this out here in the West and see if we can get them on the podcast, because I think it's an underserved part of our sport that is definite. With women specific information, gear, riding, bikes, it is certainly underserved, and I think the more information we can get out there, the better. So
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Kelly, you have an awesome day, and we'll get this podcast up and out. So
awesome.
Okay, have a good day.
Thanks.
All right.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
So that is Kelly McCahey. Again, go over to overandoutmoto.com. You can follow her on Instagram at overandoutmoto. Lots of cool stuff she's got going on. She does these big events, and I think they're pretty popular. And it's definitely, in a niche where there's not enough information out there for women. It was really eye-opening for me to just talk about boots. She's like, look, I can't get the boots that I want. And I started going looking, and I'm like, yeah, they don't make them in sizes that would be typical for women. And so that is a problem. But those Fox boots, I think they were the Fox, I don't know, can't remember what they were. If you go to Rocky Mountain ATV and you search for boots, women's boots, Fox women's, there's a women's line. But it might be a little bit of a challenge that way. And definitely the bikes are a challenge. I love that Beta 200RR, and I think man, woman, child, as long as you're over about, 5'2", because you can get the bike lowered, that's a bike that is going to be stinking stellar for a lot of people. So anyway, thanks to Kelly for coming back on, and thanks for her followers for submitting a bunch of questions. We had other questions too. It's just, the mind can only absorb as much as the seat can endure, and so we're been about an hour and 45, a little more than an hour and 45, almost an hour and 50 minutes on this thing. So if you guys haven't subscribed, I want you to do that. If you want to use my links to support Dirt Bike Channel, I've got links for Rocky Mountain ATV, Motorsport, and Amazon. It should be in the description of this, but it's probably easier to find those links over on my website, dirtbikechannel.com, or on any of my YouTube videos. I have the links there on those things. And I'm going to put this thing in the can and go eat some lunch. So hopefully you guys have a good week, and let's leave a single track. Thanks.